So it's Sunday night. Globex just opened 6:04 p.m. Gonna go through expectations for this week as well as a very quick review of what happened last week and the implications that holds for early this week and going forward on some higher time frames as well. So we'll start with the S. So very quickly, last week was a short trading week. This week is a short trading week as well. New Year's Day is Wednesday, so the market is closed at that point in time. Tuesday is a regular trading day. There's no half day like we had last week, so it's just Wednesday's closed. And then Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday are regular trading days this week. So just to get that out of the way. Last week started strong. The prior week we had, on the cash index, we had that volume spike into the low. This is Michael Gayeds, I don't know. His ETF was looking at it. It's hilarious relative to S&P performance, but I digress. So working off of this, so on the cash index, that prior Friday low that we had with this huge amount of volume of buyers into the lows. So working off of that last week, I was primarily looking for continuation back up into the highs, which we got in the first couple of days. So we got a really nice amount of continuation early on and basically stopped dead into this is prior balance highs, as well as the lows of this upper distribution from all-time highs as well, which is a natural place to find, some sort of resistance, right? Like trading back into prior balance highs, trading up into this upper distribution here. Found some lack of bids above. It wasn't even so much responsive selling up here, to be honest, like at least from what I saw. It was more it looked more like exits from lower. Like it looked like a lot of it was cleaning inventory out from lower from people that have been long, as well as just not finding buyers above. We tried to, so we ended up having a very weak Asian and Euro session on Friday, which had continuation on a true gap down that never got filled on Friday. And all through A period and B period, we sold basically into the low in what turned into mean reversion. But early on, there were signs that this could have been a trend day. The expectations last week were that we were going to get an inside week, which is exactly what we got. It made total sense, considering where this market is trading, as well as the fact that it was a short trading week with holiday volume, with Christmas Eve, those closures, etc. Inside week and a lack of real decision is, it makes a lot of sense, right, on those weeks. So we got that. The Friday liquidation actually found a bid down into, essentially down into the 50-day, the 50-day moving average on the daily chart. We didn't quite get there on ES, but on the S&P cash index as well as SPY, you can see we did. So we came down into, and we had a good amount of volume as well. So we came down into the 50-day as well as here. We were able to hold it, and we basically closed last week right in the middle of weekly range. So a pretty indecisive week. This week set up in such a way that we have an inside week. Generally, what we want to look for is trades around the extremes in a case like this. The middle of this range is going to be quite choppy. The best opportunities really are going to be around Friday's low into last week's low, or last week's highs into this area up here in 6100s. They go 7s, 10s, etc. up into this area up in here. So inside weeks can set up a directional move when there's decision on a breakout. So basically, similar to an inside day, you generally want to look at the extremes and play the break and continuation. Or if it's a fail, like a sweep and reoffer of the high, or a sweep and rebid of the low, you want to look for the mean reversion trade and then the move to the opposite extreme potentially. Those can also force pretty nasty trend days as well, which you really don't want to be on the wrong side of. So the big things I'm looking at this week, generally I still hold the view of, I'm looking more on the long side of the trade. That might not be correct. Like if there's very clear short trades that start to set up, I'm not just going to, I'm not going to take them, because I'm saying I do think I'm more of a buy the dip in this time, in this area. But really what I'm more interested in this week is if we trade down into the bottom end of this double distribution profile that we put in the weekly, is there acceptance of value lower So basically, are we finding bids down into this, 13 to 4s area? So basically, the meat of this distribution from Friday, are we finding bids into here to force back up? Are we seeing any aggression down here from buyers that can push us back up into the gap, potentially fill the gap and back into last week's POC? Or is there just, is it, slow tape, no real bid on the ladder? It's super thin. That's a lot of what Friday morning was. Like the ladder was just very thin. No real aggression on the buy side other than right off the open. We saw a huge buy sweep into 50s that went absolutely nowhere. And that was the start, basically failing the open print, started that melt all the way down. So areas I'm looking at on ES, obviously last week's low is very, very important. So if we have some sort of, if we have continuation from Friday down below PDL, which is 82s. So if we have this, then I'm going to be looking for the sweep. So last week's low is 65s. I'm going to be looking for that, looking to see if we sweep this and if that forces a rebid and we start to creep back up, and whether or not, that could potentially force a trend in the opposite direction. I'd want to be a buyer down in here if that's the case. If we end up losing and offering 60s, then I think, I don't know how likely that is. It's possible because it is the last week of the year as well, the last couple of days of the year. So we might have some tax loss selling. I hate using that term because I don't know how accurate it actually is, but it is, just seasonally, it is possible to see, some selling down here, or selling this time of year, I should say. So if we do see 60s go, basically, I think like I think this is more of a buy than it is a sell if we're starting to get into these lows personally. But where that would be wrong is if we start seeing, this area here and these old single prints down into the lows. So this breakaway day we had from the low, last week's low basically came down, puked into those single prints from the breakaway. The second set of single prints from the breakaway, ran some stops, and then reverted back up. If we see that same type of move down in here, down into 60s, if we can't sell below 60s, I would think the same thing is going to happen. We sweep last week's low and we start mean reverting and pushing right back up. Where I think weakness starts to set in is if we start seeing 60s offer and we start backfilling the first set of single prints down here. I think the likelihood of us coming back down into 5900s at that point, it's probably pretty high, and we're going to test the lower part of last week's or the prior weekly distribution down in here, because we'd basically be losing 2 weeks of value, right? So we'd lose the lower part of this distribution here if there's no acceptance at 13s, 13s and down into 4s and the meat of Friday's distribution, then naturally price is going to seek lower for value, and that's going to be back into that prior week's value area low, as well as last week's low. And if we can't accept down here, again, we're going to start seeking lower, for real buyers and a real bid, which will likely, in my opinion, be back down into 5900s area. So basically, two setups: we sweep and bid, and we force the mean reversion trade back up. If we can end up holding this area here, 613s to 04s, basically hold the meat of Friday's distribution, find some buyers in here, then again looking for the rotation back higher, back into 50s, potentially fill this gap, and ultimately would want to see last week's POC get taken up into here. And then obviously if we fail the lows here, going to be looking for lower down into 5900. And if it gets really nasty, then down into the gap fill that we didn't actually fill. But I think I'm more on the side of thinking that this low is still going to hold. And obviously we'll know pretty quickly if I'm right or wrong about that, if anything sets up in the process on ES. So we're already at about 9 minutes, so I'm going to fly through NQ because it's pretty much the same thing. So again, inside weak, strong, started off strong, ended up weak, closed in the middle. Friday, primary area on Friday really to me is going to be whether or not there's acceptance over 700. So this 21,680 to 21,700 has been a critical auction pivot for all of December. It's also the base of A period's excess high from the sell. So if we start having acceptance over this, basically holding the base of A period's excess, then the move really for me is going to be up and backfilling this excess up into, 850, 870, and then seeing if we can get back up into last week's POC. Pretty much the same thing as ES, right? If we can continue to accept value, last week's value, this is a very clear double distribution profile. If we can continue to accept last week's value and find buyers down in here, then that's going to be the move. The areas underneath that would be 640 to 610. So basically watching last week's value area low into the 20-day SMA. Again, if we can find buyers on any stops down into here, I'm going to be looking for the rotation back up. Sweep and fail of the low, or pardon me, sweep and rebid of the low. Again, same thing, rotation back up. And if we start losing 2170s, 21470s, then looking for ultimately the move back into the lower range of this distribution, down into 21300s, more likely, I think, down into 21160s, and potentially as low as the 50-day SMA down here into 21,780s. So that's pretty much it. Again, still generally like the long side of the trade. I'd still rather be a buyer. I'd rather see us fix some of these highs and some of these ETH highs first before any sell. I'd rather see that continuation to the upside play out from these lows that we put in on Friday. These aren't going to be perfect necessarily, right? But I think the one thing to bear in mind is, like, I don't think the long trade is really invalidated until this low is lost. Like, until we're actually below these weekly lows and we start shifting the weekly time frame to framing down, I really don't think we're out of play there. And then the other thing that's also true is the same thing happened on the Q's cash index as well, right? So we have the similar amount of volume, not quite as significant as it was on the S&P, but again, still had the highest daily volume, held a critical area. We held the 50-day SMA on the cash index when we came back down into it. And again, a pretty decent amount of volume, closing middle of the range on Friday, which just makes me generally, looking at how the higher time frames are reacting, generally looking for that long trade. So where I'd start really looking for the short trade and thinking, this is potentially more bearish than not, is if we're unable to really find any buyers above this gap. So two scenarios really, like if we sweep and fail the high, I think that would force a pretty nasty reversion, the liquidation back down. Or if there's just no ability to fill, this very small RTH gap that we put in on Friday. Friday, it's not significant, but it is significant in the sense of, like, there just wasn't anybody interested in buying above this on Friday. So really what we would need to see is, finding buyers above that in a big way to try and get us back up into the highs. You can generally use gaps, like regular trading hour gaps. You can use them a lot of the time as just kind of gauges of where the auction's sitting on the higher time frame. So we've been sitting above this huge November 6th RTH gap and continuing to auction above, which to me, generally speaking, is putting buyers continually in control until this is lost. So until we've basically, lost this gap, lost this breakaway that we had, and we trap all this inventory and all these distributions above it and start liquidating below it, which we've still yet to do, right? Like, we held that very well into that Friday low with that huge amount of volume on the cash index here. We still haven't even been able to backfill the gap. So that's kind of the way I would look at this in the short term too, is like, if we can't find buyers above 60s, really 50s, 60-50. If we can't find buyers above this, then that might signal early weakness and we get that move back down. And then this might not be a buy down here. So pretty open to anything, to be honest. Again, it's another short trading week with the holiday Wednesday. But I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully this helps. It's kind of a clear week in the sense of we know exactly where we can control risk. But it's also pretty fluid because we had an inside week and we closed right in the middle of weekly range, basically. So, like, there's not a lot of decision, at least right now, the way this is sitting. But at least we have some pretty clear areas that we can watch, and we can make decisions around those areas, which is all we can really do, obviously, as a trader on a short time frame. So hopefully that helps.